All right. Hello and welcome to Learn Airtable Scripting Part 3 of 4. We're not 75% of the way there. We are going to be 75% of the way there by the end of the session. So Gio, welcome back. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Aaron. Thanks for having me again.
Yeah. Well, I mean, thank you. I don't think we
We're
would.
at like what, 51.3% of the way done now? No,
Are we going to be counting the percentages
is that
every
where
minute? Are you counting down the seconds?
I we could we could write a script for that. Shit,
Right. We could. We
we
could.
don't need to.
I'm seeing a bunch of folks joining us live. Let me know in the chat. Say hi. Tell us. Again, I'm going to ask this every time. I'd love to know: are you like a professional developer? Are you a newbie like myself? Have you played around with scripting since we started it? I'm going to give a few minutes just to let everybody join. So yeah, so let me know in the chat what level developer, scripter, whatever you want to call yourself, what level you are. I feel much more confident, Gio, I have to say. I'm not saying this because I host this, but
We're
because
only 50% of the way there.
no, I think today I can do a little more. I will use you
Okay.
as a crutch whenever I need help, but I've played around a lot since, and yeah, just feeling much more confident. It was much less intimidating than I thought. We haven't added any new methods or any new kind of actual theory since the first one, but really just using that same information in different ways. Is that something that is the case in for most uh, folks who are learning scripting? They're kind of using a set amount of methods. Do you feel like there's a lot more to learn here?
I think there's always more. Like I would say, like there's random, not necessarily random, but there are functions and built-in parts of JavaScript that I don't use on a day-to-day basis.
Mm-hmm.
And so I will default to things like map, filter, find index, etc. Right? Like things are familiar to
Right.
me. I know how they work. I know how they fit my toolbox. I know how to format data into them. I know the data output that I get. And so I do think it's common that once you start using some of these features, you start thinking of how to distill all problems down into the tools you have at your disposal. Doesn't necessarily always mean it's the best way, but it is a way. So I do think that is a very common experience. Is once you get sort of some of those core pieces for iterating through a list or finding an element in a list, you just start reusing those in different ways. There may be better ways or other ways, and you'll discover those as you tackle new projects and explore more from other people as well.
Yeah. So there's an expression. I think it's what for. If all you have is a hammer, everything is a nail. So my hammers are map, filter, and find. That is what I know. So we'll be continuing that, but it feels like those cover a lot of what I need.
Yeah, again, those allow you to perform an action over the entirety of a list, filter that list down to a subset, and then find an individual item out of that list. Like those are kind of three big logical portions of any script or application will require those actions. So with those three, you've got a pretty good fundamental grasp and your basic hammers that you need in order to go smash some nails.
Yeah. Okay.
I
So
don't know if that analogy totally works, but
yeah,
we'll go
it
with it.
works for me. I think it works for folks here. So I'm seeing Geo. I can hear Geo very well, but Geo seems frozen. So let me know in the chat if you can hear Geo. And Geo, if you don't mind, just maybe like resetting your camera. There we go. You're back.
Yeah.
Okay. Just
Oh, my
give it a
back?
little. Yeah, I think you're back. So if that happens,
Okay.
yeah, okay. Geo's back. Let me know. You should be able to. I think everyone heard Geo hopefully throughout that, but Geo's back. So bear with me. Uh, 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 I hope everyone is by now very forgiving of technical issues now that we're all working from home. I appreciate everyone's forgiveness on this one. Cool. Okay, so today, what are we doing today? So, I spoke to Gio, and honestly, those two scripts we've written, we first week was finding duplicates. Second was creating task items or action items based on a specific project or a type of project, right? Recurring. So all those action items that we had for a specific project. But in both cases, a lot of people in the chat were like, well, wouldn't we want to find a duplicate automatically, right? So whenever someone submits a record, we want to instantly find whether it's a duplicate. When we create a project and assign the right project type, we want to go ahead and create the action items. So Geo, how do we do that? I think is a good question.
Yeah, so the scripting app, which we've been using so far, are really great for those instances where you want to, we often use those for bulk action. So
Right.
take some input from the user, based on that input, basically scan the entirety of my table or some large subset of the table, and take significant amount of action based on those inputs and the records I have at my disposal. But you do sort of get to a point where that requires manual entry from the user. And so you want to move to a state where those actions are happening on a smaller scale, but triggered by events that are occurring within the sort of day-to-day usage of your application. And that's where our automations feature set becomes very powerful, as it allows you to set up those if this then that or trigger an action type workflows where you can say, when this field on a record is updated, take this set of actions. One of those actions we allow you to take is execute a script. So all of the same tools that we learned in scripting app, we can now use in automations and have those be an action that is taken as a result of the incoming trigger. So you get to sort of scope your script down to be acting on, one record at a time, rather than having to, comb through the entirety of the base and try and take action on everything in bulk.
Right. So I'm curious in the chat. Let us know if you are familiar with Airtable Automations, if you've used it, this kind of if this then that format. So you have a trigger, right? Something that sets the automation in motion, and then actions are what you want the automation to do. And so let me know in the chat. And while you're writing that up, hey everyone, saying hi to the chat. What I'm looking here is the chat. I wish I could give you the interface, but this is my chat zone. It's where it's happening. I wonder, for folks who are familiar with automations, why would I write a script within automations? Like, what are some examples, and what are those use cases where you're kind of thinking of writing an automation or adding an automation to your base, but then you're like, oh, this will take a script?
Was that for me or for the chat, Aaron?
That was for you, Gio. You're co-hosting.
Oh, okay. Sorry. So I think that the two scripts we worked on in the previous weeks are ones where, again, you can distill those down to being very action and trigger type oriented, where it's new record is updated, that a set of fields are updated. I want to check if these are now a duplicate of any of the other records in my base. Very good example. The project and task creation one is another one where it's, as soon as a new project is created, I want to automatically generate those sets of tasks. So we often recommend automations when we start hearing people use, well, if this event occurs, I want to do X. Where we recommend scripting specifically depends really on the complexity of the calculations you want to do in that then step. If you're just sort of shuffling data from one table to another, you likely don't need a script for that. If you're trying to embed a lot of logic in between the trigger and that final action, things like, based on the type of project, there are a different set of tasks that I need to be able to pull. And I want to be able to calculate start and end dates based on the start date of the project and, what phase the moon is in, right? Like that just requires a much more specific level of logic that you're probably going to need to use scripting for.
All right. So no astrology today, but I feel like that would be a popular stream. I feel like how to get astrology into your Airtable base would be popular. So is it?
Yeah, based on your daily horoscope, yeah.
It sends a message to let folks know, gives a record that folks can go to and say, based on the stars today, don't talk to Aron or don't talk to Gio, or do talk to Gio.
Yeah,
do talk to Aron.
Be nice if I just put like a do not disturb on my calendar. Yeah.
All right, cool. I think that would be possible. Actually, I think we could do it. I'm not saying we will do it.
I think we could do it too. Like I'm only half joking. I think we could if we really wanted to, but maybe not today.
This is the point where everyone should ask, should you do it? And that'll we'll see. Okay, let's get into it. I'm excited to write some code. Okay, so for today we're gonna write the two existing scripts into that automation action, right? So I'm gonna go. Let's do this little choreography here. You should see my screen here. Gio, you should also see my screen here in just a moment. And everyone should now see Gio. I wish that was a little more graceful, but this is what we have. So we've got our virtual events tracker. This is the base out of which we wrote a script a couple of weeks ago to identify duplicates. So let me actually go back into that script. This is our little agenda here. So we can say the introductions were done, adding a little checklist there, updating our checklist. There you go. Okay, so now what we're going to do is go ahead and kind of recreate or reuse the script we had previously, but instead of having to run it manually, which as a reminder, you had to go here and you had to run the script and it would find duplicates in your attendee table, in our attendee table. So it would see, okay, Brooke McDougall is here 3 times. Let's go ahead and flag them as a duplicate. Now, what that requires is actually like someone remembering to run the script. And that is potential human, not failure, but folks can forget. So we want to go ahead and do is to, whenever someone submits, right, or adds a record into this table, let me close this over here. So when a new record is added, reminder that folks come to our events via this form, right? So they RSVP. At that moment, we want to say, is this a duplicate? Do we already have this specific person in our attendee table? So Gio, you're telling me automations is a good place to start that. So let's go ahead and do that. So it feels like a lot of folks have used automation. So Penny has as well. So let us know if we're going too quickly in the automations part, but we want to kind of get into the script, right? So our automation always has a trigger and potential actions. In our case, trigger is what sets the automation in motion. And what we'd like is to trigger our automation whenever a new record is created. So I'm going to call this identify a duplicate. There we go. We're going to choose a trigger, which is when record created. Is that right, Gio?
For a duplicate, yeah, when a record is created is probably the right way to do it.
Cool. In our attendees table, let's run a test. Let's see what comes up. All right, so this is going and getting a recently created record. Let's go and see what the field values are. So this got Mitsuko. Let me find that. Mitsuko right here. This is the record that they pulled up. And we have to imagine as if we had just submitted this specific attendee. And then we have actions. We could send a Slack message. We can do various things. One of those things is writing a script. So actions are what you want the automation to do. So what we want to do, we mentioned Slack. You can send an email letting that attendee know you've received their you know, response. Ideally, you check if it's a duplicate before doing that. In our case, we're going to go into an Airtable and run a script. So maybe Geo, before we kind of start writing code, I'm going to kind of go ahead and copy paste the code we had previously, and that feels like a good place to start. Is that like a best practice you would recommend as well?
It depends. So that is definitely one way of doing it. And there may be changes you need to make to the code in order to run it in automation. There are some differences, right? So automations don't allow for user input, for example. But I don't think in this case we didn't have any input, so shouldn't be an issue.
Okay. So maybe that's actually a good place to start. So what I've done there is I've gone to our script, I've copy pasted it, and I clicked command backslash to comment out our whole script. And this will just serve as a reference, right? So we'll copy paste those pieces that we need, and we'll kind of remove all the rest. As a reminder, what this script did is read our table. It went and got that kind of the table, our attendee table. It looped almost like twice. So for each record in that table, it went and tried to find a duplicate. So looping over the table once, taking all of those records and checking whether there's another record that had that same email. This right here, the email. Oops. But did not have the same record ID. So that's how we flagged that it was a duplicate. And then what we did is we just updated all of the fields that were duplicates with a little flag. So you mentioned, Geo, that there's a fundamental difference in that we can't have inputs, right? Can you speak a little bit about where does the information come in that case? How do we kind of use the fact that we're running in an automation to pull in information of that record from the previous step?
Yeah, so in scripting app, you can pause the script and say, hey, don't execute anything else until the user gives you some inputs. You can say, hey, select a record, select a table, select a view, give me some text, right? Because the user clicked run on this script, right? So the assumption is there is a user there that can answer those questions before completing your execution. In automations, that no longer holds true, right? This automation needs to run based on events and triggers that are occurring within the data in your base. And so what we can do instead is use what our automations call input variables. So the trigger and every action can output data that becomes available to the next action. And so you get this sort of cascading set of steps or actions in your workflow, and each one can pass information into all subsequent actions. So in this case, what we can do, if there is input we need from the trigger, we can use that add input variable there on the left in order to create those inputs.
Okay.
The most common one that everyone starts with, right, is the ID of the record that kicked off this automation or this workflow.
Okay. So I'm going to call this record ID. That's going to be how I reference, that's how I pull in. And what I want, this is kind of that same plus we see in automations. And what I want is I want the record ID from the previous step, right? So I want record ID like that, right? So now it's saying whenever I go input.config, and if I put that into a variable, I can then say that variable.record ID is going to give me the record ID of the record from step one. I know that's like a lot of you gotta like almost the record and the record ID of the record, but what we're saying is that now I know somewhere where I can get the record ID from step one. Is that right?
Right. So this will now, anytime that another way to think of it is every time this automation runs, you will always have the record ID of the record that started the workflow. So the new record that was created.
Okay. So should we let's actually just keep this. And I think there might be additional information we want to eventually pull. I'm going to kind of keep it to this. So
Yep.
So Colleen's letting us know that there's some audio pops when Gio is speaking. Apologies, I think we're having some Zoom issues. Is my audio okay? Is this on Gio's side? I don't know. Do you have any ideas what we can do, Gio, from your end?
Let me look while you get this set up. Let me see if there's any
Okay.
settings I can change.
Okay, cool. All right. So just the outline of the script is actually going to be similar, right? So we're gonna go ahead and say, let's read our table. So let's go and find that table. So very similar to what we have before. And then the next step is going to be check whether any record in that table matches the input, right? And the input is that step 1, right? That input.config. And then if it does, we want to update the record to say it's a duplicate. I know computers are the worst. We must learn to control them to an extent. So that seems like a good kind of outline. So we've got read our table and Gio, what I'm wondering, this feels very similar to what we have down here, but I'd like to learn a little bit more about how do I work with input.config. So what I think we can do, correct me if I'm wrong here, is to actually get those same, the same commands for reading our table. So we're still going to work within the attendee table. So we need that. But what I'm curious is like, how do I get this input? Like, how do I get a field, like a variable with the record from step 1?
Yeah, so we provide a similar to like base.get table. There's a special function and object for getting access to that input. In this case, it's called input.config. So if we want to get the input, you do var, I think I normally call it like input config or new record, or there's a couple different ways that you can name it, equals.
Why wouldn't you call it attendee?
Input.
Why would you call
config?
it specific to that config?
Because depending on how much data I'm passing in through the input config, it may not just be the attendee, right? So you imagine this script may be like 3 or 4 steps down the line, and I may have 3 or 4 actions worth of information in my input config.
Okay, in this case, do you mind if we call it attendee because we're only passing in one?
I think that's fine. I think it makes sense.
Okay. So input, you're saying input.config. And do I need to specify that I want the record ID? No, because it's just going to give me an object that has all of this in it. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Let's console.log it, our good old friend console.log. Boom. And we could just test this, right? It's just going to go. We should not fear the test. We should embrace the test.
No, you should not fear the test.
Okay. So I've got record ID. So if I console.log.record ID, it's just going to give me the record ID from.
You would just get the
string.
Correct.
Okay. Okay, cool. Okay, I think we can work with this. So now, I promise not to use you too much as a crutch here, Gio, but I'm going to think out loud and you can correct me. So now what I'm kind of understanding is that, okay, we know which record ID, and we could potentially get the values, you get cell value for that specific record ID, right? And what we want to do is check whether any existing records in our table, so we're trying to find a record, that's a good one, find a record that
Yeah.
matches the email, right? So, here,
Right.
if I kind of look back to here, we first had to run a filter, which is our ability to run over the whole, table to find the record. But we don't need to do this in this case because we're only trying to match that one record. We already know which record we want to match on. So we're kind of jumping to this step right here, that find. Is that kind of understanding it right?
Right. So the filter was used to basically, we have every record in the table. We only want to work with the ones that are duplicates. In this case, we don't need that filter because we're only checking the one record. We're not checking the entire table. We're just checking this individual record. Does it have a duplicate? In which case we can jump straight into the find portion of that script.
Okay. So what I want to say is, okay, I'm going to try to do this. No pressure. Let duplicate equal, right? That feels weird, right? Because we just want to actually update one value of the record that's inputted, but let's keep it this way. Let's keep going. I know that it feels weird, but let's keep going. So we're essentially going to loop over query over the records dot, and we want to find. So we're going to call this, let's call it record, but I feel like that's not the best variable name. And what do we want to check? Okay, this is where we want to check something. Actually, I'm gonna do the squiggly brackets because that's what we've been doing so far. And okay, so find will return true, or it'll stop essentially if a condition is true. So we need to return that condition. And what we want to do is check for every record, for every one of these bad boys, whether it equals that record ID's email matches record, right? So I know I'm going to use record dot get cell value of email equal to attendee. But see here, I don't have get cell value. So
right.
I think what I can do though is actually get the cell value from the table, right? So I can use the query. Can I do that? So I can say for a specific record, give me the cell value.
You got two options.
Okay.
There's probably more. There are two options. One is you can go find the record in the table and then use get cell value like you would have in sort of our more batch script.
Okay.
You also have access to all of this records information through the automation and input config. So the other option is you could add another input variable that is this record's email and reference it that way. I think referencing it through the input config may be a little bit easier.
Okay. Yeah, I agree. So I think one of the options is saying like query dot records dot, kind of, would it be, no, it would actually be a select. Record. Yeah, it'd be a get record, right? So it'd be like a wait.
Yeah, query get record, because you have the ID. So you can just say, give me the record with this ID.
Right. And then saying attendee dot record ID, and I could equal something like this, right? And so I can equal, and then good dot get cell value, email, and I would call this email equal, something like that, right? That feels verbose, right? So just for folks to understand, we're going into the table, right? We're getting the record, the specific record ID. We're going into that specific field, and we're returning the email. So if I just console log this, or I gotta put a let or var console.log email, and I return. Let's test this. This is gonna fail, but that's okay. Do not fear the test. Oops. Okay, let's just like that. And we have the email. Now, this does feel very verbose. Is that a word? Very complex. And what you're saying
Verbose.
is that we can just verbose.
Yeah.
Verbose is a better word. We can just say put the email from step 1 and get it from input config, which definitely feels
right.
much more natural. So email right here, insert, there we go. And now what that means, I can remove this. If I console.log attendee.email, it should give us that. Oh, it's a caps, case sensitive. Boom. If we test that, we output the same thing, but is a little more elegant. Or hopefully, I don't know if it's going to output the same thing. We'll see. 50-50.
Depends who you ask.
There we go. I feel this is more, anytime I could write a smaller, like I feel like a non-developer could understand the input part versus that, query get record ID, that feels a little too much. So let's use that. So coming back here. Okay. See, I was worried. I'm feeling a little more confident now. Okay, so we're saying attendee.email, right? And so here, it's still giving us a little, we got to put this between parentheses.
You got to add a return if you're going to use squiggly brackets.
Oh, right. Okay. So it's going to return.
And
now
then,
this is always going to be true, right? Because, triple equal.
Close.
Yes.
Triple equal. There you go.
Thank you.
That's why you were getting the red squiggles, because you were trying to, you needed triple equal. You could have done double equal, but we go triple equals here.
What's fun about streaming coding is that I know if I make a mistake, I may look, not the smartest, but someone in the chat will correct me, which actually makes this much more fun and easier, because I could imagine spending a couple, a good 10-15 minutes trying to figure this out on my own. So appreciate that. Thanks for the help. Okay. So now, but this is always going to be true because there's always going to be one record, namely the record. So it would also loop over this one, right? So we have created the record in records. Like if we would run this, duplicate will be true. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, let's just run that. I'm
because
curious.
you will probably find yourself.
Console. Why won't it let me console? Oh, because I haven't closed this.
Oh, you're missing a close parentheses. Yeah.
There we go. Okay, let's run that. So we know the duplicate is going to be true.
Or it should be in find
it returns that record.
The element that matches.
The element.
Yep.
Right. Okay, so it's returning the one that we just created. So we need a secondary. So we need to make sure, I'm going to put a space. I know it's not the most nice, but I want everyone to see this as a right. So what we want is record.id. So it's saying that this ID should not match double equal, right? Record ID is not equal to attendee.record ID. So this is saying, make sure that you only return if you find a record that has the same email, but not the same record ID as the input. So now duplicate should be empty, essentially.
It should be undefined, yes.
Okay. I'm
Unless that one
something
is a duplicate. Okay.
I'm going to say something a little sacrilegious here in the sense of, for me, undefined and empty, in my mind, are for all intents and purposes, the same. But I know that that's not true. I know I'm making you feel terrible.
Have you run into null yet?
No. I hope to never run
or
into
just
null.
undefined?
just
Okay.
undefined.
Well, that may change your perception about undefined being equal to empty, because null throws a wrench into that. But for this, yes, you are correct.
Okay, good, good, good. I know that if that ever happens, I'm gonna write to you. And folks, feel free to write to us if you hit that. If you hit that issue, whatever that issue is, we'll be happy to help. Okay, cool. So, this is so now I essentially know that if something is in duplicate, right? So if it is not undefined or null or whatever, like if it exists, right? Then I should set this, right, that record that we've inputted, the one with the ID, right, the one that was just submitted, should have that duplicate flag, right? So if it's undefined, that's cool. We can submit the record, no problem. But if it does exist, if its length is not 0, if there's something in it, we know that we should flag the record as a duplicate. So if I'm understanding this right, we can say if duplicate, which is just kind of saying like, okay, well, if duplicate is just saying it's going to check whether something is there. If it is, it's going to run the code between the squiggly brackets. And if there isn't, it's just not going to run, and my output will be nothing. Is that correct?
It is.
Okay. Is that the correct way of doing this?
It is.
Okay, cool.
So yes, it is. You'll be fine.
Okay, cool.
Go with it.
So what I want to do here, would you recommend, so at this point, I actually want to update the record, right? So I want to go ahead and, await. No, I want to, do I want to just say await, update record? No, because I don't know which field. I first need to create.
Two ways to do it.
Go ahead. I need your help here.
Right. So you could, So you could update it the same way that we did in the other script, where you use the functions in scripting to update the record directly. The other option is to output, whether or not this, whether or not this record is a duplicate, and then use another action in this automation to actually perform the update.
Yeah. So essentially, I would say if duplicate outputs. So sorry, I'm gonna do this. Yeah, this feels. So I'm a proponent personally, as someone who doesn't write code for a living, to reduce the amount of things that could be unclear to folks. So essentially, what I would like to do is output from the script that there is a duplicate, and then use automations itself to update that record as a duplicate, because that feels more readable to anyone who's not a developer. So what you're saying is we could output dot set as true, right? And it's not letting me output. How would I output in this?
Yeah. So for output, it's the same. You need a name for the output and a value, and so that the next step of the automation can reference
got it
by name.
So
similar to how you have the input, right? There's name and value. Output needs the same thing.
So I'm going to call this. Can I give it multiple?
I don't think you can do spaces. So you could say like is duplicate just as one word.
Right. And we're saying return duplicate? No, we would return. Oh, we need a variable. So we can say like let is duplicate equal false. And then if duplicate, turn duplicate into true. Is duplicate true? And we get output duplicate.
And I would actually move the output duplicate outside of the if, right? So we always want our automation to output, or we always want our action to output something for the next step. And so in this case, this script will check whether or not there's a duplicate, and that value will either be true or false. So the next action can be taken.
Okay, let me, so this is going to output false because there is no duplicate for our test one. All right, so is duplicate is false, and that's what we're going to set our little flag to, right? But let's do this one more time. I'm actually going to go ahead and let's say the record right above. I'm just going to copy paste so that we actually find a duplicate. Let's go back into our code. Let's run that again. And in this case, it should output true. We need like the Jeopardy song when it's running. Okay, it outputs true. So now in the following step, right? So I can reuse this output. And I feel for me, Gio, that feels much more, I don't know, not legible or more graspable. That we update the record. So we're saying take the record from attendees, go to that record that was just created. So that record ID from step 1, and take the field is duplicate and set the value. So now I have a step 2 here, and I have is duplicate. So take that value, insert it, and if we run a test here, it's going to go ahead and set this record to duplicate. Boom. And so now it's run that automation. So clicking done, let's turn this on. So just as a reminder, whenever a record is created, it's going to go ahead and run through our table, try to find another record with the same email. If it does, it's going to output true. If it doesn't, it's going to output false. And then we're going to put the value, the output of step 2, into duplicate. So we've got some excited people in the chat. I think we can do a little success. We can do success. All right. So, oh no, did I not? Oh, there we go. Here it goes. Woo! I was worried that it didn't work, but here we are. So let's try this out. Let's run this. Let's create a Surinder Matiwala. Let me copy paste that. Let's go into the form. Let's open the form. Let's try this out. So we only need the record to match the same email. So I'm just going to go put this in email. There we go. Little game of copy pasting. Now, what's cool about the script is that if you want to, broaden what is your definition as we did in the past, maybe you want the same first name, same last name, same email, same phone number. But for us, it's really just, oh no, there's no field that matches our option. Okay, is this limited to a view? Let's do, I was not expecting to debug this part. Let's put it to all. There we go. Let's refresh this form, copy paste this. This was supposed to be the easy part. John Smith, same email. There we go. We should have some right here. Account-based marketing. No. Let's submit. All right. Boom. Let's go into here. It's turned on. This should have run. If all went well, it's currently in progress. Imagine some Jeopardy music in your mind. Do, do, do. Can you give us a little Jeopardy music? Oh, ran successfully. Too late, Gio. Next time. And then here we have the duplicate flag, right? So, woo! I don't know. I get excited when I write the script. Less so, because you've tested it. I know it's going to work. But I think just as a final note here, what you can do is then actually run another script that deletes it, right? Or send a Slack message to let folks know that there's a duplicate. Because of the extensibility of automations, you're really limiting the amount of code you need to write to that little function that you want to do, and then have more from there. Anything to add there, Gio, except your excitement, which I can see from here?
No, I think there are some additional like chain reaction actions that you can take as a part of this automation. So you can do things like send an email to someone, flag a Slack notification, just let people know nearly in real time, right? Like that executed almost immediately after the record was created. And so people can get those updates and know that there's something that they need to check and diagnose in order to help keep your base and data up to date.
Yeah, awesome. All right, so that was script 1. We now kind of understand the mechanisms. We're going to do the same thing for the second script, right? So I'm going to go into our checklist here. I'm going to say we have done step 1. There we go. Step 1 is complete. And we can go on to the second script. Reminder for our second script, what it would do, or what it does still today, is to create work items for specific project types, right? So what I mean by that is, let's say we have this project, which is an SEO review. That is a standard product. So let's say we go into request type. We have an SEO review that has these specific action items. They are always structured like this. So if I go into SEO review, we first do identify baseline for performance, agree on goals with clients, and then create content calendar. And we want to create those in our work items. So if I was to group this by project, right, we can see those action items reflected. So the one I was using as an example was dolls to the wall SEO. It's one right here. So historically, what we've had to do is actually run the script manually. Let me actually, let's run it once, maybe. Let's delete these. Let's delete these ones as well. So now we have 2 projects that don't have any action items. We would run, we would pick a record, let's say Helen of Toys migration, and then it would create the action items automatically. But when you think about it, you know, why wait until a user clicks run? That feels like a lot of work. We are busy people. And what we'd like is like when all of the information is filled out, we can go ahead and run action items. So what I mean by that is whenever something enters this view, so when it has kind of no action items, and maybe Gio, would you recommend also putting like a little additional checks, right? So that the other fields are filled out? Or would you be okay with just saying when a new record has no action items, run the automation?
I think it just depends on what you need in order to successfully run your script. If your script requires that the type be provided, then the type should be there. Right. So that's kind of the thought process behind when to make something a part of your view versus when not to.
Yeah, so in our case, I think we want this to be when action item is empty and type is not empty, right? So what we're saying is that we don't want to trigger this when just we're creating a record willy-nilly. It's really when we have type and maybe even client, right? Maybe we want to say, okay, when the client is also filled, those feel like good, like we have everything, right? So we have those 3 records. Those are the minimum amount of information we need to run this automation. So we're going to call this create action items. Our trigger, in this case, we're going to match it to this view, right? We already have this view. So when record enters that specific view, we're going to go into our projects table, projects without tasks. Let's run a test. Make sure we get one here. It's going to be this one probably. Well, I hope so. We don't have any other records. Whoops, I said test again. That's not what I wanted to click. All right, which record did it come out with? All right, it's this one, Dolls to the Wall SEO review. That's the one we have. So now, instead of kind of running manually, we're actually going to write that script. Let's click done. And our action is going to be like similar to the other one to run a script. So I have multiple crutches. Geo, you are one of them. The second is I always copy the script I previously had written into my automation. So I'm going to copy paste that whole thing. Oops, automations. There we go. Edit code. Okay, and I'm going to just comment all of this and will just serve as a reference for future. So time check here, Gio, we've got 10 minutes. I think we can do this. So outline, I feel like, is similar, right? So we first want to, go into, get our inputs, select the project from input config. So instead of kind of having the user tell us which project, we know which one it is because it's going to come from input config. Then we want to find template action items. And then in this case, we're actually going to create template action items in action items table. I think we call this work items. So the structure is relatively the same. And actually a lot of this we can reuse, except that whenever we kind of have template item, it's going to come from our input config. So I think that's actually a good place to start. We're going to say project is, no, we're going to call this record ID. Right, there we go. Okay. And the value is from step 1. I feel like that's a good place to start. Maybe we'll add as we go along. Gio, what do you think?
I think the other thing you'll want is the project type.
Okay, you're right. Let's call this project type. We're going to go and get the type, and I want the name of the type, right? Not the record ID. I feel like that's easier because it's the name we can always filter by name. Okay. So
we can
let project equal input dot config. Let's console.log project. This is just giving us this right here, right? So it should return 2 value pairs. The simplest script we'll have written. Just gets the data, outputs the data. Always a good start. Okay, and here it's an array, right? So I've got project type, which is so this, just a moment here. This is a linked record, which could potentially have multiple linked records. So it's giving me an array that says, okay, the first linked record, in our case, always going to be the only linked record, is SEO review. So if I go into project type, to get that name, I actually have to put 0 to go and get SEO review. So if I console log that, like that, let's test this one more time. Let me know in the chat if this makes sense to you. We're just trying to understand what the input is. Okay, so if I want to get SEO review, I actually have to go from project into project type and get the first element in that array, which in JavaScript is 0.
Right.
Cool.
So in this case, we know that, you're only ever going to have one project type associated with any given project. So in this case, it's safe to just go and say, give me the first element, because I know in my system, I never expect there to be more than one.
Perfect. And we could even potentially check that in like output an error or something if that's the case, right? So
you could, if you wanted to. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. So the rest of the script, so we want to then find template action items that match that project name. So I'm going to go into right here, similar into, so this part we've kind of done. This right here. So I'm saying go and get all template action items. So I'm going to start copying from my script, but I'll explain what all of this is. So we're going into that table. We're getting the template items. We're creating all template items, which is that table. It's our table right here, which is template items. We're getting that whole table. And we want to filter down to those that have SEO review or whatever our input is. When you think of filtering, you got to use the filter method. So again, I'm just going to go ahead, same thing as before, copy paste this. I've also learned that writing scripts is like 90% copying other people's scripts. So this is good practice for that as well. It's a little tight here, but what we're saying is take all template items, go into the records, filter down. This is going to loop over those template items using the template item, get the request type, and here that equal, we're saying project.getSellValue, a string, does not exist anymore, right? Because that used to be from our input. In our case, if we go into project type 0, this is going to return this right here. And I don't need dot anything. This is actually just going to return SEO review. So let me just console log that. Let me know if this is going too quickly. I'm happy to kind of explain further anything that we're doing. So we're essentially just copy pasting the old script because we're trying to do the exact same thing, except that the input is no longer the user selecting a record. It's us kind of pulling it from this input.config. So we've got those three objects. Those are, identify baseline for performance, agree on goals with client, create calendar. That's what we see here in the console log as well. I hope. Let me make sure. Yeah, identify baseline, create content calendar. So now these are the records we want to go ahead and add to our action items table. So this is this right here, create action items. So again, we're going to have to create an array in our script. So how just how I learned this is I think of what I said a week ago, right? And I'm like, as I say it, I think of how we're going to do it. So again, coming back here, let action items, very similar. We're going to recreate this. But I will talk through it. I'm going to So we're going to use the map method on template items, which we just created right here. And map, what it does is that it takes every element in your array and then runs a function for it. In our case, what this function right here does is it formats each element in the array in the way that we need it so that we can then create records async. So far, how am I doing, Gio? Is that right?
Yep.
Okay.
Looks spot on.
Good. This is actually surprising. I didn't think this would be that close to what we did, last week. So template item, that's great. We can get the name, the status we want to set as backlog, project. Let's run this. Let's see what happens. So what I want to do after is use exactly that same work items. And we're going to create those records. So we're outputting the array and then running it. This is no longer good. So it says action items is not going to be created properly. Let me see if I have any red squigglies. I don't.
It's because of project.
Right.
So line 23 there.
And let me understand this.
Originally, in our first script, project was... Oh, go ahead, Aaron.
No, go ahead.
So in our original script, the project, right, was a full record that we had identified from the base. Here, you've named project to be the input config. So the name still checks out, but the value of
Right.
it in this case is very different from the value of it originally.
So remind me as a linked record. So just for folks, we're going to be about 2-3 minutes over. I think we can speed up a little bit, but I do want to make sure everyone leaves here understanding what we just did. Work items here is the linked record to that initial project that we're creating, right? So we want to create the linked record right here. So we want to make sure we're linking to the right project. So we need to create a linked record. Remind me what format. So if I go, I think here into the search, it's multiple record links.
Record links. Yep.
And it's essentially saying I need an array. How does with an ID, right?
Correct.
Okay. So
and so
here,
you have the project ID. Yep.
What I'm saying is that instead of project, I just want to say here, but I need an array. So I actually need to put this in an array. And within that array, I want to say, okay, the linked record is project, no, so ID, like this. So I'm saying this is the ID key. No, boom.
Yep.
I don't need that. I need to go into project, get the record ID.
Yes.
Woo. Okay, and if we had multiple potential linked records, I would put a comma here at the second one, at the third one, even potentially use another map here to create the multiple linked records. We're not going to do that, but, food for thought. So essentially, just for folks to understand, or, even to myself, what we're saying here is that the format of a linked record is an array. So this is that right here, that curly bracket here, with this format in it. And here, what it's saying is that if you want to add existing linked records, so this is overwriting any existing, but we're going to be creating records, so that's not a problem. But if you were updating, you can just use this little triple dot, which my understanding, the triple dot is just going to say, add in this array, and then you go and get the existing array in that linked record. I know this is a little tedious for folks who are, so don't worry about that if you are just wanting to add new linked records or creating records. So what we're saying is that we have an array. In that array, every single object, in every single, is just, at least it needs an ID, or it needs an ID only to know which linked records we want to add to. And we're just saying go and get the project ID. Now we have no more squiggly brackets. And I think maybe before we create, let's just, last step here, I just want to console.log what this looks like. So console.log all, no, it's not all, it's work items. What is it called? Action items. My God.
Action
I am
items.
Terrible at naming stuff. There we go. So let's come here. So we expect 3 kind of objects, right? Because we have 3 objects in our previous object 0, fields. So the action item, that's our name, is a single line text. So this is just a string. And we've just taken the name of the template item that we received before, the status, the project, and this is that array, right? So it's saying that first element, the only element is one ID, and it's our project. And this is coming from our input. And it puts the same value in each of our different elements of our array. So this one is going to be the exact same value. If I can get it to open. There we go. It's the same record ID, and it's the same record ID that was inputted. So now we have our array that is correctly formatted. We can go ahead and we're just saying, okay, go ahead and create records async. With action items, go ahead and create these 3. Let's test this. There we go. It's run successfully. What that means we should have, there we go. Right here, dolls to the wall, 3 work items. So we can actually turn this on. We don't need extra steps. Let's test this out. Let's do this one more time. I'm going to actually go ahead and delete 3 work items. Let me actually do this the other way. Maybe a little easier just to make sure I don't trigger it. Let me turn this off first. There we go. Just to make sure this is working. Chalk site migration. Let's delete the work items. Okay. So I'm going to actually remove the client as well. So let's turn this on. Right. So this is currently not in our projects without tasks. But if I add the client, which was Chaka, it should appear in our view. That is the trigger. We can see that it's run successfully. If I go into work items, we see that that was created automatically. Woo! All right. Now's a good time for success. There we go. Awesome. That was exciting. And I'm glad that most of that was just reusing, that script we had done a week ago. So I think we can also check off our last step here. We're creating action items automatically. Map is honestly, I don't know where we would be without map, find, and filter.
All hail map.
Awesome. So hopefully, let me know in the chat if this was, if you feel just a little bit more confident writing scripts. Gio, huge thanks to you for being a crutch, for being our guide. I feel like we could not have done this without you. That's for sure.
You made it this far.
75%.
You did 90% of this without me. So you're all good. We're 75% of the way there. 25 to go.
Awesome. Well, huge thanks to everyone joining. We have one more session. I might actually be doing some live scripting as well, just for fun, actually building on top of these scripts on my own Twitch channel. So I'm just going to go ahead and drop that. Automate all the things TV. That's my own channel. I might do some live scripting without Gio for the first time, which is going to be even more stressful. So I want to make sure that pros like yourselves in the chat, or at least, that we're tackling it together. Gio, I know you sporadically stream. Do you want to share your Twitch channel as well? And yeah, huge thanks for coming. Let me know what you think of these sessions. I definitely love doing them, and I hope you get some value, feel a little more confident writing scripts. Just a tiny bit would mean the world to me. So let me know. Cool. There we go. All right. So yeah, Gio's at the first pancake, first with a 1 leet. Cool. Thanks, Colleen. Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate everyone joining. And with that, gonna let you go until next week. Hope to see you there. If not on my stream, at least on Airtable TV. Cool. See ya, Gio.